Welcome to DIYing America, the show where we explore civic hub building in the US. I'm your host, June Cleese, and on each episode, we meet the inspiring folks who are weaving and strengthening our civic fabric. Their stories, experiences, and ideas offer valuable insights into how we all can contribute to a stronger, healthier, and more unified America over time. Today, we meet Caleb Christen. Caleb holds degrees in law and divinity and has served as an active duty officer in the United States Navy Judge Advocates General Corps before attending seminary and engaging in organizational leadership nationally. He co-founded the Intermovement Impact Project, also known as IMIP, and Better Together America. The IMIP project is an innovative endeavor that aims to bridge gaps between the over 10,000 nonpartisan organizations working to revitalize American democracy. In Better Together America, Caleb's focus is on nurturing and connecting the civic hubs across the country that are working with their local communities to identify and meet needs, as well as generate volunteerism for a healthier democracy. Civic engagement is Caleb's key driving force. He is a hub builder in his own right, forging a civic hub in the DC area first, and now in Virginia, where he lives with his wife, Bridget. Let's get started getting to know Caleb better on DIYing America. Welcome to another episode of DIYing America, and I am super thrilled for our guest today, Caleb Christen. And Caleb, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, June. Pleasure to be here.
So Caleb and I have been working under the banner of the Better Together America front of building out what these hubs are about, which is, as we know for the show, its purpose is to highlight hub builders and this hub building that's going on across the country. And we are going to talk a lot with Caleb about his role in Better Together America and getting these hubs encouraged, I think is a good way of putting it, across the country. But before we dive in, I'm bringing a little bit of an extra flavor to what we're doing on the show by just sort of getting to know the minds of our hub builders a little bit more. And the question that I had put forward to Caleb was, what does civic courage basically mean to you? What is that? If it's a thing, what is it to you, Caleb?
So it's a great question and something I hadn't given a lot of thought to, at least in terms of naming it as such. So for a little bit of background about me, I spent most of my career in the military. And so courage is one of the core values that the military revolves around. And so I think I've mainly historically thought about it in that context of, straight out of the Hollywood movie, it's jumping on the grenade, it's running out in the middle of a firefight and, heroically saving your fellow troops. And that's all well and good. And I'm sure in those occasions there was courage displayed. But I think when we start looking and thinking about civic courage, I think it takes a little bit of a different approach. So there's still a lot of overlapping concepts, like it's still taking actions that potentially expose yourself to harm, or there's something you're putting at risk. But it's not necessarily that same degree of perfect for a 30-second highlight reel in a movie. I think especially in our current society, what civic courage looks more like is being willing to do something. Just as an entirely starting point, it can feel very overwhelming. I mean, how often do people say, like, I identify the problems with society or with my community, but it's too much. What am I going to do? And so civic courage can simply be like getting engaged. Um, in the long term, it may require more than that, and it probably will. But as a starting point, I think it's just being willing to step out there, even if you're not like an expert, even if you don't have a ton of experience. all that much more courageous to say, I'm going to get involved in my community and make it better.
And one probably has to lead a bit through the forces of curiosity in their life, right? There's the problem, and now I'm curious about what my role can be in trying to help facilitate a solution, right? So would you say it's curiosity driven in some ways?
That would make sense. I appreciate your viewpoint on all these things. So I hadn't contemplated the curiosity side, but uh, I think one of the problems with any kind of courage is that if it's just charging off in one direction, especially if it's not values oriented and or like having listened to what's going on around you, it runs the danger of just being useless courage. And so having that curiosity, being willing to listen, being willing to engage with others and not just, Rambo style go it alone, makes a lot of sense.
Right. And we do have a lot of kind of whipped up rhetoric in these times. I think it ebbs and flows throughout American history, but we have absolutely sort of have a lot of whipped up rhetoric around things these days. So when we talk about something like civic courage, to me, it's not so much about that external act, although that is the end result of it, as it is that what you have to muster inside through an internal journey to be able to say, I'm going to go do XYZ. I'm going to, even vote for that matter. For some people might be an act of courage, but more like I'm going to just start attending these city council meetings that I've never attended before, and I may not know anybody, but I'm going to do it because it's going to help me understand my local community better, that kind of thing. Or whatever that step that you feel a person feels led to take, there's an inward process. And I think you hit on something. There's the initial layer of civic courage that says, I'm going to just go and I'm going to put myself out there. But then there's the element of vulnerability once you're out there. And to sustain that presence within your community, within a cause, whatever it might be, whether it's regional, local, national, that there's an element of putting self aside and saying, I'm going to take some risks here, even though I know it's possible, not necessarily likely, but possible that I'm going to make some people angry with me or not so happy with me that I'm putting my foot down or taking a stand or working towards something, that I see as a better way forward for our country. Let's kind of dial into that element of it just a bit when we think about what civic courage is, because what I like to do is get to know our hub builders, and you're not only just a hub builder, but you're the I used another word earlier. You're trying to get those hubs birthed around, but you're not
Right.
forcing,
Mhm.
right? Encouraging, I think, is what I used, right? We're encouraging these hubs. So, as an encourager and also a practitioner of hub building, right? So, before we get to that, I need to dial back and I need to take our viewers back in time to when you were young, little Caleb, right? And so when we think about this broader thing about civic action, civic courage, who in your life, or what maybe events even in your life, when you think about those first 20 years, your developmental years, the place where the core of your civic identity starts to get shaped, whether we realize that or not. When we used to teach more civics in schools, we actually encourage this in children to start to think about what is your civic identity. But going back in time to your life, what inspired you towards civic action? Who were your role models? Who did you see? What was going on that inspired you to say, I want to take civic action? And you took the big leap of civic action, which is actually serving your country through signing over your life to Uncle Sam.
So it's a wonderful question. And I think the best answer I can give is that it was mainly my faith-based upbringing. And so I had many wonderful influences in my life, family, teachers, so on and so forth. Uh, and I don't think I would have recognized this at the time, but now looking back, I think my faith journey kind of geared me towards a life of service. And so I don't think my mindset really growing up was like some fancy like civic engagement type orientation. I think it was more of a general I don't know, baseline of like you serve your country, you serve your community, you serve the people around you. It's the love of neighbor type concepts that I think were just injected into my DNA from early on, and really military service, of course, is a way of serving your country and your community. But after getting off active duty, I think that's when it really clicked even more so on the civic side, that um, the way that people and communities were interacting, and ultimately like the politics in the truer sense, not the partisan politics, but the way of how do we navigate this challenging, complex life together in a way that everyone can thrive.
Right.
That's really where it clicked for me, that the civic type engagement was really what was the foremost way to lean into, to enable those acts of service to manifest in the community in a way that I can make the biggest impact.
Right, right. And like you said, obviously this is an examination hindsight. So when you think about, so your faith community and faith community would have culled that in you. Can you think of any particular individuals that when you sit and you sort of go, I really saw this person, even although as a kid, you're not going, oh, they're going off and being civically active, necessarily, right? You're not thinking like that. But can you think back to any particular people that you go, wow, yeah, they were really in that zone of being civically engaged? Is there anybody that stands out?
So yes, in different ways at different times. So I think my immediate family is going to be the number one that comes to mind. Again, lots of examples, but so my dad was a public school, elementary, and then middle school teacher for his whole career. My mom uh, was a school secretary in public schools. Uh, I mean, my sister, my wife, like everybody around me has been teachers, which is a really important form of public service. So like from early on, I always saw that everyone was working to take care of the kids around me.
Hmm.
But then even as they've gotten older, it's been really inspiring to watch as they uh, even in retirement, which is, it would not be unreasonable to just go park it in Florida and just enjoy the good life and cruise around on golf carts. Instead, they're spending like all their time finding ways to help their communities in a variety of ways. My mom's active in the community garden. And this is a community garden that like gives out food to local people. My dad had set up a bicycle nonprofit where he fixed up and gave away bicycles to people that were experiencing homelessness so that they could get transportation to have jobs. I mean, just again, it's nothing flashy or starting like some sort of like, mega new nonprofits, but it's just like those day-to-day interactions that I've always found inspiring.
And that's truly where civic sits, is in the day-to-day actions. I mean, it's an unavoidable truth, for one, and two, when we pull all of those things together, that's where we see the element of thriving, right? Ideally, because these all are going to feed into a greater civic well-being for any community. And put more communities doing that together, you get a better democracy in the end, and that's the hope anyway, right?
Hmm. That's right.
So your journey through, even kind of in earlier mentioned this. So you go through your schooling, and then so did you go to college before the military? I
I
can't
did
recall.
college, law school, and then joined the military.
Oh, okay. See, I wasn't sure on that order. But you're saying, so okay, you went through these different steps, and then you got out, and that's where you felt like at that point you were ready to take on more of an activist role. And I know some people don't like that term because it can be a little weighty, but I still think if you're taking action, you're kind of being an activist. It doesn't have to be all, out there raising up Cain, but uh, what landed you? I mean, and it's probably pretty intuitive, but what landed you to this space of the pro democracy field? How, I guess, walk us through that journey. How did that manifest? And then from there, we'll talk more about the hubs. But let's start with just sort of how did you even say, no, this is right for me? How did you get to that point where you knew this was the path?
Sure. And to go back to the term, maybe I would offer proactivist, uh,
I like it.
as in somebody that goes out and identifies what needs to be done. But for me, so again, serving in the military was, I spent 5 of my last 8 years on active duty overseas, including in two war zones, and very much oriented towards protecting our country and our democracy against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And so that was a really strong foundation. But even when I got off active duty, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go do civic stuff. Instead, I took a little career pause, went to seminary, and also studied organizational leadership. And the combination of those things are what led me to this space now. And again, part of it was the theological understanding that communities were not thriving the way that they were intended. And then part of it was gaining a better appreciation and understanding of systems change and how we can organize in ways as communities, as a country, to actually enact change just by sheer numbers and yeah, the energy of the people.
Right. And so when you think about that, what was like the first org or connecting space that you got into that said, okay, now I'm here, I've landed. This is where I'm starting my journey, right? What was the first jump into that specifically?
So as part of my organizational leadership program, I did a kind of a mini thesis on the role of network and systems leadership in the what at that point it was calling the pro-democracy ecosystem in the United States. And so I started off attending as many of the different fields activities as I could throughout the ecosystem. So National Association for Nonpartisan Reformers went to their annual summit, interviewed leaders from across the ecosystem, really just did networking and learning more about what everyone was doing because it is such a vast ecosystem with what 20 some thousand organizations doing this kind of nonpartisan democracy and civic health type work. And so it started off research, but then that led to initially forming the Intermovement Impact Project with Walt Roberts, where we were really wanting to look at how can we break down the silos between all the different fields in the space and enable more collective impact organizing, where everybody that, generatively looking at the whole picture of how can we not just fight over, individual slices of the pie, but actually grow the pie.
Right. Right. And continue to build on out from there as has happened. So let's segue into that. So the Intermovement Impact Project is something that you helped co-found with Walt and perhaps some others. I'm not fully aware of that particular history, but then that just sort of goes places, and we end up with these hubs. So can we link some of those dots from Intermovement Impact Project to the Establish a Better Together America and the hubs?
We can, at least for me. Of course, a lot of different people came from different directions, but uh, personally speaking, Rachel Kleinfeld with the Carnegie Endowment, I forget the full title, but Rachel Kleinfeld, a prominent scholar, came out with a really groundbreaking essay on the 5 strategies for supporting U.S. democracy. And the fourth strategy was really naming all the things that we were trying to do. Um, but it ended with like a dot, 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 concretized and locally rooted action. And the work that the Intermovement Impact Project had been doing was largely focused on bringing national organizations together,
Right.
which was good. There's still value in that. Uh, but that led us to initially forming what we had called the Local Intersections Working Group, where we brought dozens of leaders from across the ecosystem together to say, how can we bring this ethos of collaboration, of trying to help each other from across the different fields, but how can we manifest that in local communities and do it in a way where the local community is centered and that national organizations are in a much healthier relationship with state and local organizations, specifically where they're in solidarity. It moving away from the model where national organizations would swoop into a locality with sometimes savior complexes, announcing that they were there to save the day. But instead, how can we really generate it so that local communities can invite in the support that they need?
And that seems to be a consensus that people talk about quite a bit. And I know in my own work, it's been very similar, that orientation that it has to be an invitation in. And that's one of the things that, seeing IMIP and being now part of it for a while, watching this cohesion and that understanding that what is being built nationally is a relational model between the different organizations and communities themselves, right? And when the size and scope of that community is sort of defined by the people on the ground, so it could be a town, it could be. I know I talked with Vinay or Gandhi about this. What is where is what's the focus, right? And it could be as big as a state, which is a lot taller of an order for sure. But the idea that that it's defined very much locally, and so through these different iterations, or let's say trial runs of ways to get people thinking and communicating together, you sort of developed out this sort of funnel concept of a way of saying, if you're out there and you're working on democracy related projects, whatever they may be, or you're an organization trying to improve our democracy, please join us, right? Please come in, and then help funnel into the different action projects. So from IMIP and those things, how did you get to the Better Together America piece?
So through that working group that I was just talking about, that's kind of where we concluded that we needed, at that point, where we were calling local democracy hubs, what we're now calling local civic hubs. And maybe if I can pause just to explain the concept briefly, um, as June was just alluding to, it's a bringing together of local nonprofit organizations, oftentimes in the democracy and civic health space, along with community leaders, solutions journalists, uh, the folks who have energy and have a stake in the fight to um, make their community better and improve local democracy. And so it's not at all to say that these things weren't happening anywhere,
Right.
but for us, it was a coining of the term that we could then start organizing around and trying to enable. So um, as that working group kind of ended, um, me and numerous other people and organizations were really trying to lean into how can we support and enable these type of things that are either happening or wanting to happen in local communities. And after a while of doing that, uh, we kind of got together and said, well, we're encouraging everyone else to be collaborative, so it probably doesn't make sense if we're all working separately and not coordinating with each other. And from a series of those conversations, that's where Better Together America formed. Uh, so not as like one organization, but instead it was a coming together of multiple organizations, multiple people as individuals, and ultimately a bunch of hub builders who just said, we want to be able to provide backbone support and accelerative type services to these local efforts.
That's wonderful. And of course, that's so important right now, because as people are trying to think about ways from the grassroots up to improve, the self-governing systems in a republic and other elements of our democratic and civic expression, that that there's a wealth of resources out there. It's I noticed that a lot of what we try to do is connect into the things that are out there, and corral those things together so that individuals working at the local level get support that they otherwise wouldn't necessarily be able to have, just for bandwidth and financial reasons alone, right? Because we all only have so much energy in our days to give to our civic identities, kind of coming back to that concept. And this is saying we value the fact that you're willing to take some civic courage, and here we are willing to help be better together, willing to help with some resources, some tools, whatever it might be. And of course, it's more than that as it's developed out. So let's kind of get into now the very specifics of what you've been doing in terms of first encouraging hub building across the country, and then I'd like to play with what you're thinking about, because I know you're looking at hub building where you live,
Mhm.
a little bit more about that project. And that in particular, we're definitely going to have you back on to kind of circle up and give us updates on what's been going on. So let's talk about you as sort of this national weaver of these hubs.
Mhm. Yeah, and I love the word weaver. Uh, So, just to be clear for anyone who's not familiar with Better Together America, uh, let me start off by what we're not doing. And
Good.
what we're not doing is we're not like planting hubs in communities. We're not like forcing anything to happen that doesn't want to happen. Um, Instead, where there's energy, where people learn about the concepts and they're excited about it, they come to us and they say, "Hey, I want to make this happen in my community. What do I do?" And that's where what we're designed to step in and help with. And when I say step in, I don't mean that we go into the community, but instead we've created a network of support to provide them the resources that they need to ultimately succeed. And so what that's looked like is a variety of things. So we have, well, June and I, among others, have been creating a resource center. And to be clear, curating, not creating a resource center. So we're not looking to uh, make up all of our own things, but instead, there's so much resources, so many great ideas that are already in existence across the ecosystem. So we're just trying to pull those in and make them easily accessible and tailored to the needs of anyone forming or working with a hub in their community. So that's one of the offerings we have. As new people come on board in their community and they reach out to us, we also provide one-on-one coaching and advising. We have been developing, and it sounds like June, you already interviewed Vinay Orikandi, who is our partnerships director. So he's been doing a fantastic job of building out this really extensive national network. So as local hub builders are saying, either maybe I'm not super connected in my community. Who else should I be reaching out to? Who might be, key partners in forming this hub? We have all these different organizations and lists and groups that we can reach out to and connect them with local people that are similarly inclined. And from there, we also have a learning community, since part of, I think, June, what you were alluding to before is, since there are so many hubs that are forming, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for each of them to have to create their own wheels. And so part of that is what information already exists that we can give them. And then another aspect is, as they're learning and experimenting together, because every context is different, every community has different needs and goals, they can be learning from each other. So we've created a learning community where the people doing this work can come together across the country, compare notes. We'll bring in subject matter experts, and we'll have an in-person workshop coming up soon. All sorts of offerings like that, where we're really trying to accelerate as much as we can their learning. And
Yeah.
then perhaps the last thing I would say is funding. Funding is a important thing to be able to function in any kind of activities, to do things in the community, to even just build the internal structures. So we are also organizing a joint fundraising campaign that will hopefully help them get sustainable funding.
And I'm excited about this. I mean, there's this national journey, that's going on in terms of envisioning that these hubs can, well, already many places functionally do, just don't see themselves necessarily defined by that term at this point. And then also that, there's an energy out there that we're acknowledging exists in the public, that people are sort of going, where can I put this concern that I have, whether it's, where, no matter where they land on the political spectrum, that's really important that this is, nonpartisan work, or transpartisan, whatever language you want to use there. But basically, this is not about political parties, right? This is about empowerment of we the people as civic actors in their now, in the when and where of their now. So I'm excited to see how this has all been coming together, which is one thing I really want us to be able to highlight as we continue on DIY in America, because you're providing those tools that are going to allow other people to do the. It's not that this work isn't meaningful; it's very meaningful, but the real, brass tacks on the ground. This is that DIYing of America work that is, we're seeing rise up, and the energy for. So just to kind of, before we move on to the visions and the hopes, let's say, let's kind of get a landscape right now, literally a geographic kind of sense of landscape. Earlier, this is not something I'm able to pull up at the moment, but you had mentioned this map that's being built out. There's several maps being built out right now, which are fabulous, going to be fabulous tools for the American people to see how engaged other people are in doing this kind of pro-democracy work. They come from different. Some of these maps are from different lenses, but in the end, it's still serving a very important purpose to give us a sense of geospatial, right? How many people across this country are doing, and organizations are doing this kind of work. So that said, where are some of the key hubs right now, and whereabouts do they stand? Just off the top of your head, you can feel free to miss things, but off the top of your head, where are some of those key hubs, and where are they at in their sort of building process, as you're aware?
So the moment I say this and it's recorded, it will be out of date.
Yeah, we should
It's
make sure we tell people that.
good. It's evolving really, really quickly. And again, it's not because we're out there recruiting and creating new hubs, but because it's an idea that's been wanting to happen, and now it's happening.
Right.
Uh, so maybe just to give a few of the highlights, and maybe just to call out some of the cool things that are happening, which again, just a small fragment. So what, maybe year and a half or so ago, in Washington, D.C., a group of individuals said, there's so many organizations here that are focused on democracy and civic health. Why don't we start having some social activities just to get them together and get them connected? And so we started just having a monthly happy hour, and that has evolved into a full-fledged DMV, so DC, Maryland, Virginia, uh, democracy hub. And so they're doing some great stuff there. What would some other examples be? Akron, Ohio is another interesting example where it's just a place that is so ripe for people wanting to talk through some of the challenges that they're facing and find solutions to them. So there's been some really cool things happening in Akron, and I think that's only going to accelerate. Um, Montrose, Colorado, a pretty small community. They actually started with some citizen assemblies, which is a fairly formal deliberative democracy type process.
Right.
And then what kind of flowed from that was a recognition that, hey, we want to solve some of these problems that we have identified, and how can we do it? And a hub is a very natural source or outlet for that. So great things happening there. You could say Oakland, California, Miami. I'm in Harrisonburg, Virginia, so hoping that that's going to be taking off soon. Really, pretty much across the U.S. There's communities that are popping up. So it's super exciting and scaling even quicker than we had imagined.
Which is shows you're on to something, right? It shows that we're tapping into a wellspring of civic actors, ready to citizens who are thinking themselves as civic actors and saying, okay, if not now, this, when. So that there's a lot more of that seeming to rise to the surface. And of course, the hope, I would say, as we kind of think about a little bit going towards the future here, the hope, I would say, if I'm putting words in your mouth, and you can add to or subtract to this as you like, but is to see this just continue to grow. I would imagine at that national level, and if you want to add anything to that, but then also, now I know you were involved previously in the DC hub. Now you've moved, right? You're in a different locale. Let's talk about that. What are your visions? What are your hopes? What are your dreams for what you can achieve locally at, where Caleb's feet are?
Sure. Yeah, and maybe first just to go back to your first comment,
Yeah.
uh, at least personally, my definition of success includes that each one of these locations thrives and they're able to do just some incredible things in their community to really solve the problems that their community is facing. So that's a huge win wherever that happens. But then also the really cool part of the concept of them starting to form across the country and then creating a network where I'd mentioned the learning community before, but where they're connected and they're exchanging ideas, everyone becomes more effective as a result. And after some point in time when the whole map is full of them and they're all connected, well, local plus local plus local eventually adds up to national. And so changing communities, one community at a time, at some point you've changed the country.
Well, and that's the American way, is the bottom up way, the grassroots on up. And that's what I think inspires personally me about this movement, is that it's holding true to that baseline of democratic values, that it is the we the people, and it has to be that localized energy that then will percolate, right? It'll percolate, and yeah, there'll be these moments where there'll be some synergistic larger national things that kind of like with BTA, helping to support and buoy up, and all ships rise kind of thing. But in the end, it always comes down to the individuals in each state and each territory in our union doing this kind of work. And I know we're talking about states, but maybe we need to start also making sure we're talking about our territories as well. So in time, right? One day at a time. So back to where you're at. So
Mhm.
so where are you at in your own hub building journey?
So my wife and I just moved to our new hometown about 7 months ago.
Yeah.
So pretty fresh here, and it's Harrisonburg, Virginia, which is on the west side of Virginia, right next to West Virginia.
Yep.
Uh, so I'm, of course, in pretty early stages of just trying to learn the community and network and meet the different groups and people that are already civically engaged and kind of see what the energy is that I'm walking into. And it's a really interesting, exciting place, both in good ways and not so good ways. So as far as I can tell, it's one of the most polarized places in the country. So the city itself is extremely blue, and the county that surrounds it is extremely red. And so that's one opportunity and challenge there. Another is that there's a significant um infrastructure and talent pool for facilitating and mediating. And what I mean by that is, so it's a kind of a small college town, and with a couple universities here, and they have centers related to civic engagement, and they have uh, expert facilitators who have had series in the community, both on campus and off, of conversations, dialogues that would bring together diverse people, so across political, ideological spectrums and things like that, to have some really deep conversations and try to pull the string on what's dividing us and find solutions to it. So there's already between the universities, there's a community mediation center that's active here. There's also some local politicians that are really wanting to center what they're doing around what the community, wants and needs and voices. So there's a lot of like good infrastructure here, good starting points. At the same time, there's not a lot of, at least what I'm seeing in this short period of time, not a lot of aligned community building type efforts. There's a lot of individual groups doing stuff. You have Rotary and some faith-based institutions and things like that. But I'm not seeing a lot of consolidated efforts. And similarly, on like an advocacy side, not finding a lot in the way of local advocacy, acknowledging what you had said before, June, that advocacy is probably the wrong word because this is a nonpartisan type effort. But what I mean by that is I'm not seeing a lot of groups that are super engaged in like trying to change things.
Mhm.
So again, there's a lot to work with here, and it's exciting, but also some gaps that can be filled.
And just to make sure that our listeners are clear, when you made that earlier reference, you weren't saying about the city is blue and the out region is tends to be red.
Mhm.
That wasn't the positive negative was not aligned with party. It was more about that there's tension and then there's going to be cooperation. Is that just to clarify that a bit?
Yeah, so that's my hope, obviously. It is pretty polarized, and there, as far as I can tell, there isn't a lot of uh, cooperation between the two groups.
Mhm.
But my hope is that that's an opportunity that bridges can be built, and especially when it comes to local. And this is the beauty of the local civic hub concept is
Right.
when we start talking about local issues, the things that we experience on a daily basis, the things that are our biggest challenges or are really affecting us, it's not the national issues that are dividing us. It's things that if we all just get in a room together, we can probably figure out something that works for most at least. And so
It's potholes, man. It's
yeah,
potholes.
that's right. So so yeah, it's not ideal. I don't love how partisanly divided my area is at this point, but I do see it as an opportunity for hopefully being able to work together to solve things across those divides.
Well, and as we know from studies throughout, gosh, it's been some of these ongoing studies over 20 years, more recent ones as well. We're not as divided as the labels on the maps kind of give that impression, especially if you plug into the national media narrative about ourselves, right? There's the perception gap, which has been well documented. More in Common is known for a lot of work in that area, as well as others that are just basically showing us this is a mythology, right? And where I think the hubs are tapping into is the potential of how we can break through that sense of the mythology on a very relational at a very relational level, just where we live, like you said, where the pedal hits the metal of everything, and where although we live in this illusion that we are far more interconnected and affected by global events and even national events, I mean, surely there are impacts, nobody's denying that, nobody's putting their head in the sand, but the real day-to-day stuff is where we live,
Yeah.
and it does us well. And I think it's very encouraging to hear so many Americans, it does us well that are so many Americans saying just that, right? That this is all fine and dandy, but we've allowed ourselves to sort of get hyper focused on the national and the rhetorical plays and the fear industry that goes with the two major political parties at this time in history. And, political parties have a right to exist, but let's face it, these two ran away with the shop a bit. And it hasn't always been for the good. So, as the people who are trying to kind of reclaim the keys to the shop, if you will, it's allowing for that synergy. It's allowing for that energy. You're really what I see hubs as is it almost creating that space, holding a space for
Love it.
people who want to put that energy into XYZ action. And it may not be things that people initially think about as overtly civic, right? Because we do have this again with civics not being taught as it used to be to the citizenry. We don't understand the difference between going to supporting a local kind of cause, or even just going out to sports team events in your area. That's a civic action, right? Because you're getting engaged locally, you're volunteering locally in your community. It really is about the level of community engagement. Now, how political that civic action becomes another matter. And certainly these civic hubs may choose to address those things, but they also may choose to address things like we're going to work with local government to get a bike path to the nature preserve, so every families, people can go out there and they can, have greater access to the amenities of our community. So we want to, I think that's an important thing to kind of highlight, that again, these civic hubs are coming up with their own concept of what it is they want to put their energy to as a community. So it may be tackling some voting reform issues and getting more directly involved with the day-to-day politics of their county or whatever it might be. But for others, it may be that you're trying to create other goals, but of course, realizing and gaining more practical expertise with the civic processes that allow those things to gestate and manifest for communities.
Exactly. And what I might add to that is whether it's organizing around getting a bike path put in or fill in the blank other issue, uh, we kind of look at it over more of a longer term, and all of those activities are building muscle memory. They're practicing and rehearsing for being able to work together. And if that bike path is the number one thing that that community cares about, then awesome. If they can solve that, then that's great. Uh, and maybe, like you had kind of alluded to, maybe tomorrow it's some even bigger, better, whatever kind of thing. Uh, but now they've built up more skill set, more experience, more connections between the community, and they're going to be that much more effective each iterative, time that they approach doing something together. So part of it's building just civic muscle.
Muscle and glue, really, right? An element of muscle and glue, and having to kind of challenge ourselves in these times to, and I guess I would probably link this back again to our discussion about civic courage, to also overcome civic malaise, right? Allowing the negative narratives that are sold to us repetitively through all different media channels, to not let that generate into a malaise that you give up. And we already know that over the last 50 years, there's been a steady decline in volunteerism across the country. Some areas and communities are thriving more in that way than others. But to think of ourselves as civic actors, it's a really more of a reminder to ourselves that we are community builders, community enhancers, just being part of our community, however you want to phrase that.
Mhm.
And that, though, again, kind of that healthy community, healthy democracy go more or less hand in hand, right? So you're doing the work in so many ways, in so many levels, and we're all very grateful for your presence in this broader movement, or I've heard, field is a nice way of putting it too. I kind of like that one. It kind of gets a little more like you're talking about quantum physics there, but that's just my brain. Oh, I like to play with things. But so let's think of you've got some hope. We're building up that hope through the actions that are being taken. Hope is not necessarily a passive thing, right? It's something we're co-creators of. And so I want you to kind of step back from the now with this last question just a little bit. And I like to get thinking about the people that, yeah, we're doing this for ourselves, but we're also doing it for posterity, right? Because if we're doing this ongoing experiment in democracy, that's the whole gist. We're creating this for ourselves and posterity. We're doing this work for ourselves and posterity in the now. And so, in terms of the future generations, in terms of the people that'll be getting the first wave of this narrative handed to them in a very simplistic form, say like fifth, sixth grade, when a lot of these kinds of civics issues start to come into curriculum, what would you like, or what would you tell? Let me rephrase this. So, Caleb, it's wibbly wobbly, like 50 years from now. You're obviously a much older gentleman at this point. You're talking with a family member, a young family member who's like 8, 9, 10 years old. And what would be the message that you would want them that in the future, or your message to the future now, let's say, that you'd want them to know about the hearts and the minds of the people who are doing this kind of work to preserve and advance democracy in the early part of the 21st century?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Let me think about that one. That was a little bit of a curveball. Uh, So to repeat the question, what would I want to tell them about the hearts and minds of the people doing it now?
Right. What about the now do you want them to know? So in other words, this is your chance as a primary source document to be able to say, because this is kind of what we're forming here, primary source documents for the future, right? As well, what do you want them to know? If you're saying, hey, future 50 years from now, 8-year old, what about the people and what were they trying to do? Their hearts, their minds. What do you want them to know firsthand from Caleb's mouth to their ears about this era in American democracy?
So I think what I would tell them is the people that have raised their hands are the ones that have recognized that we, the collective we, are not powerless. It's the ones who, if we look at all the people that we're seeing and many of the people that we're not seeing, it's not that they're the most experienced, the most educated, the most fill in the blank. Uh, if anything, it's quite the opposite. It's people coming from all walks of life, all levels of experience. All that they really have in common, and what's most important, is they have the energy and the desire to make changes locally in their community, see an improvement in how people in their communities interact with each other, and they're just willing to try. And that 50 years from now, when we're talking about this, and hopefully it's a past tense, what changed?
Yep,
Just people taking action and being willing to step out, even if they felt some imposter syndrome, they did it anyways.
they did it anyways. And there we're back to civic courage.
That's right.
Well, Caleb, thank you so much for your time today. I know we will have you, of course, back on to continue the story about not only what's happening nationally, but what you're doing locally there in Virginia. And we're really excited to continue that story and learn more and hear more from other hub builders as we go forward with DIYing America. Thanks for watching today, everybody.
Thank you.